Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to get this special meeting of the joint meeting of the town council and the Board of Education to talk about security for the town, for our schools in the town of Enfield. We're going to have very specific presentations. The superintendent of schools and his chief of security, Gary Harrison, will be giving the first part of the presentation. Then we'll have Chief Fox talk about how Enfield Police work with our schools. And then at the end, we'll have, again, we have a hard stop at 9. Don't think we're going to need it. But we have a hard stop at 9 where we'll allow for question and answer. But if the question and answer will be specific about the town of Enfield, we're not here to hear your views on the Second Amendment, whether you're for or against, specifically about the town of Enfield. And depending on how much time we have left, we'll give folks maybe a couple chances to ask questions. Again, we're going to be very specific. This is going to be hopefully an annual event where we're going to do this once a year, where we go over all the policies and the procedures that both the town and the schools do to keep our kids safe. So we hope to do this on an annual basis. Maybe we'll do it next February at the quarterly meeting where we have a joint meeting of the town council and board of education. So again, we want to let folks know, remind them that all the things that we've already done as a town, what we continue to do, and again, suggestions how we can do it better. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent of schools, Chris Trezek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know what's best. I'm going to have my back to someone, so don't take it personal. I think it's probably better if I look at the audience than you guys. You guys don't want to look at me anyway. So if can I hold the mic?
Mike, you want to hold it.
Is it okay if I just hold the mic? Is that all right? Okay. So I'm going to apologize for having as someone who tries to push for more technologies in our schools, this is going to be the least technologically advanced presentation I've ever had to give, but there's reasons for that. And the reasons is a lot of times we can't necessarily put up on a screen some of the things we're doing in these areas. But coincidentally, I can't make this stuff up, and I can just show you how it's highlighted that about 1 o'clock this afternoon, I actually received the annual letter from the Connecticut State Department of Education Commissioner Wenzel. It's a joint letter from Commissioner Shapiro, who's the commissioner for the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. And I don't want to just sit here and read things to you, but I thought it was important tonight that I get this letter, because one of the questions that we get often is, do we have a safety and a security plan for our schools? And the answer is not just yes, but it's also yes because it's a requirement for the state of Connecticut that every school in the state of Connecticut have a safety and security plan. And it's outlined where it says that each local and regional board of education shall develop and implement a school security and safety plan for each school under the jurisdiction of such board. Such plan shall be based on the school security and safety plan standards developed by the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection pursuant to Section 10-222N. Each local and regional board of education shall annually review and update, if necessary, such plans. Not to sit up here and read to you, but some of those things are important about what the information I've been asked to share to the degree that I can this evening. Like I said, we are required to have a safety and security plan for every school within our jurisdiction. We don't do that in a vacuum. It wasn't a plan that myself or the Board of Education just randomly came up with and decided we're going to do it based upon our own individual knowledge. Part of the plan is really a collaboration between the Enfield Public Schools and every other agency within the town of Enfield, a lot of which you see representatives from up here this evening. And case in point of that is the state also provides for us a template on what our plan has to require. And again, not to bore you with paper, but on the signatory page for every single school, we can't just sign off on it as a Board of Education. We actually have to go around, and every stakeholder in the community has to sign and review the plan with us. So within that, the people who are authorized to sign on everyone's behalf, and I know some of the folks here are aggravated by seeing us come and getting the signatures every year. I'm joking, but it's not a fun topic to talk about, sorry. But myself, I was the superintendent, the school board chair, the town manager, the school principal, the fire chief of the area where the school is located, the police chief, our emergency management director, local public health director, local emergency medical services director, and our local fire marshal if it's different from the fire chief. So when we develop a plan, it's done in conjunction with all of those people that we just mentioned. Not only is the plan developed and created by those people alongside with the Board of Education, but every time that we do a drill or every time that we do some sort of change or a modification to the plan, it all has to be done with the authority of the people that were listed on that sheet. As far as what's one of the requirements that every plan has to have, in addition to just having it being in conjunction with the people that I mentioned, is that every year by state law, we have to review our plan and we have to submit it to the state of Connecticut for approval. By November 1st of every single year, there's conditions that which we have to answer on the questions that we send back. If there were any change in the previous 12 months to our plan, we have to outline them for the state of Connecticut to tell them what the changes were. If there's any change in personnel that was on last year's plan application, we have to describe to them what the reason for the change was and get a new signature on it. The other part of the plan is that we also have to include, and I'll get into this briefly in a minute, is anytime that we do a drill or anytime that we do any kind of, whether it be a school safety drill, a fire drill, those are all mandated as well. We're required to do drills on a monthly basis. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But part of that drill process, we also have to do an assessment of each drill. And it's not just myself or Mr. Longy or the principal of the school that does the assessment. We do it in conjunction with the parties that are relevant. So if it's a fire drill, we have fire officials with us that assess the drill. If it's a school security drill, we have law enforcement here that helps us along with doing the assessment of each drill. Sorry, I don't like to stand here and just read facts to you, but I thought it was important to at least share with the public that these are things that we're actually doing. The other thing that we're required to do is that we actually have to conduct a security and vulnerability assessment for each school in our jurisdiction every 2 years. So a lot of questions that sometimes I'll get from concerned parents, sometimes I've even gotten questions from students of, do we have a vulnerability assessment? And the answer is yes. Now I'm telling you all this and I'm not putting it up on a screen because part of it, and one of the things that we've learned, unfortunately, over the last 6 years or so, is even though we have all these plans and operations within our parameters, the first thing that was recommended to us as we were going through this is obviously we can't share those plans publicly. And the reason behind that is, for obvious reasons, if you can't give your playbook, if someone has who has intention to do harm to themselves or others in our school, we can't show where our plans are and our emergency evacuation procedures are. So there are some frequently asked questions that I thought it was relevant, but I'm telling you all the boring stuff in advance. And I won't be insulted if the whole thing is boring to you. But as part of our plan, like I mentioned, we're required to do drills. Every single month we have to either do some form of drill, whether it be a fire drill, a lockdown drill, a secure the school drill. So far this year alone, we've done 101 drills throughout the district. Last year we did about 120. And as I said earlier, that's not just the school doing a fire drill, timing it, getting the kids back in, and then calling it a day. We do those drills, then we do a comprehensive assessment after the drill. And we're constantly looking at ways to improve the drills that we're doing, making sure that all stakeholders involved understand the importance of the drill. Where did we do well? Where did we do wrong? It's a constant evolving process that we go through. The law does require us to do a minimum of 7 fire drills and 3 crisis drills in a year. But like I said, with the amount of drills that we've been doing over the last 5 years since this plan has been in place, we've been exceeding, obviously, the minimum that we're required to do. All of that data that I just shared with you, I would love for people to say, well, he told us it, so it must be true. Certainly understand when people sit up here and tell you the things that, of things that we're doing, but I can't show you the actual document up on a screen. I understand there are some times that people are skeptical about that. What I'd ask is that if those who don't believe that we're doing certain things, and I'm not suggesting anyone in this room is doing that, the best way to prove that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing is money. And one of the things that we've been very fortunate, at least in my time here, is that since the state of Connecticut introduced school safety, the school safety legislation and the subsequent grant money that went along with it, the town of Enfield has received almost $700,000 in reimbursement grants from the state of Connecticut. So what a reimbursement grant is when the grant was first introduced, part of the requirements for the grant was the local community or the municipality had to put the money up front to do whatever sort of infrastructure changes for security purposes that the town was going to put into place. And in order to get reimbursement, we had to, A, show that we had a plan, that we said the plan that I just very boringly told you that we have in existence, we had to not only produce the plan, but we also had to produce an action plan with a commitment from the local municipality that they were going to pay for all this stuff in the event that the state was going to reimburse us for some of these funds. Enfield was very unique when this grant was first introduced in 2013, because at the time the grant request went in, the town of Enfield had already completed almost $1 million worth of improvements to its school infrastructure regarding security that a lot of surrounding towns hadn't done. So no, because I did the grant application, as part of the application, we'd have to show what were we planning to do, and we'd have to get price quotes from local vendors. It was a lot easier for me to submit a grant application, but instead of getting a price quote from a vendor, I was able to show a receipt, because the town of Enfield took it extremely serious, particularly, and this was all in response to Sandy Hook, and I'll share with you some real-life examples after that. Excuse me, I have a terrible cold and it's starting to act up on me. You could edit that at ETV, I'd appreciate it.
Who's got the mic next?
If there's we'll wash it off for whoever has it next. I apologize. So one of the contributing factors to us getting the amount of money that we got, at the time the first grant was announced, the town of Enfield was the largest recipient of a reimbursement from the state of Connecticut for security purposes than anybody else in the state. And the reason for that is the folks that were up here at the time, some of them are still here, made a commitment that we need to make sure that we have to do an assessment of our buildings, find out what the needs of our buildings are, and just instead of waiting for the proposal of a grant to come through, they put their money up and they said, just go ahead and do it. So as we were submitting grant applications, we were actually submitting the bills for those expenses that went along with it. So we were extremely fortunate to get in that first 2 rounds of grants, like I said, almost $700,000. I know a lot of communities who, the other benefit of doing that was as communities were waiting for the grant money to come in, one of the disadvantages that a lot of our partners in other areas had was there's very limited amount of contracted vendors who were authorized to do this type of work in schools. But because we were one of the first ones out there that actually started implementing some of these things, we didn't get on wait lists like a lot of our neighbors did to actually do some of the work that was performed in our schools. So a lot of the things that people are just getting to now in other surrounding towns, we were far in advance ahead of them because we had the initiative to go out and do it, and we had the support of the town to actually fund it up front. And we were awarded, like I said, with the largest grant allocation that I'm aware of for any other town in the state of Connecticut. So in order for us to get this money, and like I said, it's very low tech, the town has spent about $1.5 million on security improvements for our schools since 2013. That's not a short order. Part of the reason that we were in a position to get a good chunk of that money back is because the town took the initiative of ensuring that our schools were as safe as they could be very seriously. And as a district, we're very thankful and appreciative of that. But as I said earlier, this wasn't something that was done in a vacuum. This was something that, in order for us to accomplish the things that we have, and I don't want to give the impression that we're stopping, but what we can talk about thus far is the things that have been implemented already. It's actually a partnership of all the people that I spoke about earlier. It's not just us in the police department, it's the fire districts, it's EMS, it's each fire district, it's our own internal folks here. It's briefing the elected leaders on some of the initiatives we want to do moving forward and really getting their unwavering support in order to do that. So we are very grateful that we're in a better position. I talk to colleagues all the time who are still struggling with finding funding to do some of the things that we've already done here in town. The other piece that I wanted to share with you guys tonight, and then I promise I'll take my cough and go over sit next to Brian, was what are some of the things that I could share with the public about how we operate when it comes to security. And the first thing I can share with you guys is there's days in everyone's life where you remember where you were when something happened. And obviously for all of us, that was in December of 2012. We all know where we were. I can say it because he's here now as a citizen and not as a police chief. But about 10 minutes into the incident in 2012, I got a call from Chief Speraza at the time. And he said, have you heard what happened? I said, I heard a little bit. What can you tell me? He said, I don't know more than you do, but we'll be over in a minute. And within 10 minutes, not only was Chief Speraza there, but Deputy Chief Collins came along with him. The Public Safety Director at the time, Mr. Bromson, came over with him. Captain Hall came over with him. Captain Golden came over with him. And within 20 minutes of not really knowing what had happened, the Chief of Police and the Superintendent's office, and I was Assistant Superintendent at the time, and he said, we don't really know what's going on at this point, but here's what we're going to do here. I'll have any resource that you need. If you need officers in your building, if you need us to come talk to staff, you need us to come talk to kids, you tell me what you need and we will be there. And as days progressed, I had those same conversations with all of our fire chiefs, all of our emergency personnel, and Gary's been involved in all these conversations with local and town officials at the time. It's been something that's been a true partnership since. It's unfortunate what got us to that point, but the process that we started back then continues today. And I'll leave you with this, because I was asked to talk about some real life experiences that we've had that I could share with you. One of the things that we got out of that, and I probably should say too, because I know I don't want to put the former chief on the spot, I'm more than confident and looking forward to that relationship continuing with our new chief. And the reason I'm speaking first is because after you hear him, no one's going to want to follow him. So the last piece that I do want to share is there's a lot of times people, because you don't see it and you don't think it's tangible, people don't think it's actually happening. One of the things I can share is that this communication that we've established amongst all of us is something that's practiced on a daily basis. You may not read about it in the papers. You may or may not hear about it on social media. We can't control that. But I can't tell you how many times, and I tried to count, and we're well into the hundreds, where we may see something in the school. And again, we're not necessarily experts. It may seem like it's a kid just doing something innocently, but maybe it's stupid. But we don't take anything lightly. And though you may not read about it on the news or see the cameras coming down the street, doesn't mean that we don't call the police department, whether it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or unfortunately 2 o'clock in the morning, which happens more than we like to admit, and say, whether it be to Chief or to Gary or Fred or to Jeff, this happened today, just wanted to let you know, what do you think we should do? And I can tell you on more times than I can count that not only will they take the call, but within an hour, they'll call me back and say, we've already been to that student's house. There's nothing to worry about. We've checked the house. You know, whether it was a direct threat, an indirect threat, whether there was no threat at all, nothing goes without some sort of investigation, just to ensure everyone the peace of mind that we did everything. We dotted all our I's, we crossed all our T's. And they will always circle back with either Andy or myself and say, this is where we went, this is what we saw, everything's in the clear, but we're making sure that we're constantly talking to each other. In the last 5 years, there have been hundreds of cases that you're never going to hear about that we've looked into. Fortunately, they've all turned up nothing, but it doesn't mean that we're not taking every single possibility as seriously as we can. And that continues even as far as last night. I got a call from Gary, and it's reciprocal. If the police department hears about something that they think might have an impact on the schools the following day, they'll call us, whether it's at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock in the morning, just to make sure we're talking to each other and ensuring that everybody's on the same page and doing what's best for the citizens and, most importantly, the safety of the kids here in town. So I think I've exceeded the time that the manager allotted me. It's much easier when I can point and click at things than doing this off of words, but at this point, I will turn it over to the aforementioned new Chief Fox. I'll take my papers away.
I'm gonna try to project, 'cause I'm
Oh,
good at it.
he's gonna. He doesn't want to touch the mic.
They're recording it, so
You might need it for television.
yeah, you're gonna need it for television.
I'm not contagious anymore.
Okay, well, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alaric Fox. It is very much my pleasure, my privilege to have the opportunity to stand before you and to introduce myself to you first as the newest police chief, or the new police chief for the town of Enfield, and then to address this very important area that I know is of great concern to all of you, and it is of great concern to all of us as well. By way of brief introduction, and the folks behind me have heard this several times, so I I promise to do the short version, but to the extent that I'm meeting some of you for the first time, it has been my privilege to serve as Enfield's Chief of Police for going on 4 weeks now. So admittedly, I am the new guy to town. I would offer to you with a certain degree of humility, however, that I do stand before you with about 33 or 34 years of aggregate law enforcement experience. I spent 7 years as a Willimantic police officer back in the 1980s. I spent 2 years as an FBI agent from 1990 to 1992. I did the attorney in private practice thing for a couple of years, and I went on board with the Connecticut State Police in 1994, which is really the bulk of my law enforcement career. I spent 24 years with the Connecticut State Police, retiring from that organization on March 1st, and retiring as the colonel, which is the highest ranking position within that organization. I had command of about 1,200 troopers in that position, and I had responsibility for the entirety of the state. I certainly am not going to overplay my hand in any way, as I was not one of the first people to Sandy Hook. Quite to the contrary, I was in Tolland when that call came in, but I was at Sandy Hook along with so many of our brave coworkers, and I do very much take seriously the concerns that you have as residents, the concerns that you have as parents, the concerns that you simply have as citizens within this community. I was asked and thought it a good idea to break my comments and my observations for you down into 3 primary areas. And as I understand it, there'll be a Q&A period after, so I'll address any concerns at that point or in the interim if it seems appropriate and something is really on your mind. But what I would like to address with you is really threefold. I'd like to talk to you about how the Enfield Police Department specifically, or how law enforcement in a general sense, handles and investigates any of these calls for service that come in that may be low-level in nature or appear to be low-level in nature at the outset, or they may be quite concerning at the outset. Our response is equally robust. It's equally vigorous, regardless, whether it appears to be lower level in nature or whether it appears to be of great concern at the outset. So I'd like to talk to you about the investigative protocol first. After a few minutes of that, I want to talk to you about some of what Connecticut law has to say, some of the statutory restrictions, statutory provisions as to firearms issues that I think are relevant to the discussion that we're having this evening. And then finally, I want to talk to you about a law enforcement response in the event of an active aggressor. I will say it now, and I'll say it again. I'll reiterate it when we get to that piece of the presentation. Please understand that that final piece of my comments, that law enforcement response, is the doomsday scenario. And I certainly don't want to minimize the significance or the terror that would be associated with that type of event. But I do think that we are better and you're better if you understand the robust protocol and the robust response that this community would enjoy in the event that we had that doomsday scenario occur within this town. So that's really the 3 prongs of what it is I'd like to talk to you about this evening. And in advance, I thank you for the opportunity to address these very important matters. So the first of the 3 is the investigations discussion. And the superintendent addressed this well, and he sets me up properly, or sets me up smoothly, to be able to dovetail onto his comments. What is it that law enforcement does? What is it that the Enfield Police Department does in the event that we get any sort of a school threat? I hope you find comfort in how seriously we take any such threat. And let me tell you a little bit about what happens. Oftentimes, the nature of the threat that's brought to our attention is in that category, at least at first, of appearing to be juvenile, sophomoric in nature. But we can't assume, and we wouldn't assume, that any sort of threatening comment was any kind of an, ah, shucks, don't worry about it, nothing's going to happen. So the response might be some threatening complaint. It might be some stupid comment. It might be some offhand statement. Very often in 2018, it's some sort of untoward social media post that's gone viral within the school. I'm 53 years old. In my era, it was the magic marker drawing across the bathroom wall or inside a stall where someone indicated that they were going to commit some act of violence, that they were going to plant some sort of explosive device within a school. And we still get those now, but by and large, the types of comments that we see, sophomoric, immature, stupid, silly, it doesn't matter. They all get that robust, vibrant response because we're not going to assume that any of them are nothing other than silly. We're going to take them all quite seriously. So it comes up in social media. It comes up because one student heard another student say something. It comes up because a teacher or an administrator brings something to our attention. And a couple of examples come to mind to give you a feel as to the types of things we're talking about. And these are all real-world examples. They've been sanitized so as to not compromise anyone, and at least a couple of them are not even from this community, but they're ones that I've had exposure to recently, and I thought you might benefit from getting a feel for what I'm describing. I took a call recently from a friend who has an administrative position. Let's say that. He has an administrative position that provides him with a certain degree of oversight within a school system. And he called and he knew the right answer, but he was looking for some affirmation. He said, what we have in the school that he's responsible for, he said, we have a photoshopped picture that's being circulated through Snapchat. And the photoshopped picture is of a student holding a rifle. Now, while that is perhaps somewhat concerning, the student holding the rifle had been photoshopped into a school setting in the picture. Well, now all the alarm bells should be going off, and they did go off. And he called me, it's not from this community, but he called me, I think, because he was looking for affirmation as to whether or not, in this particular case, the state police would be receptive if he called them and said, I'd like this looked into. And the answer, of course, is absolutely. Not only should you call, but you need to call. And he knew that, so he made that call, I think, with a degree of increased self-confidence. And in fact, in this particular case, not an Enfield Police Department investigation, law enforcement did respond, and they did drill down, and they did look into what it was that had happened, eventually coming to a conclusion that gave everyone a degree of comfort. The scrawled threats across the bathroom wall was an example I used a few moments ago. Unfortunately, we get those everywhere within the state of Connecticut, and we get them with some regularity. That prompts the same level of a law enforcement response and the same level of a law enforcement investigation. A little bit more recently, an incident where a folding knife was taken from a student after a student made some concerning type statements. When these events occur, the school administration knows, the school administration is encouraged, and we're really proud, as sappy as this is going to sound, we're really proud, as trite as that is going to sound, to partner with the school to get that call and to say, yep, we got somebody coming. Give us the opportunity to look into this and provide everyone with that comfort level and that understanding that we've investigated it and we don't believe there's a reason to be concerned. What would an investigation along these lines look like? It's going to involve speaking to the student, as you can imagine, that occurs when the parents are present. It might include speaking to the teachers or administrators. It could include requesting consent to search the home of the parents of the child to determine whether or not there are any weapons inside that home that the parents don't know about, or perhaps that the parents do know about that aren't necessarily secured appropriately. If individuals don't want to give consent to such a search, and I'll tell you that ordinarily they're very cooperative, but in the event that a given parent or caregiver didn't want to give consent to such a search, we do have the option in Connecticut, really twofold. Search warrants are always an option, or what we refer to as a risk warrant. You can think about a risk warrant as almost a mini search warrant, if you will, typically utilized for public safety situations. And I have seen those risk warrants and search warrants used in my law enforcement career with regularity because they allow us to get into locations to ensure that we don't have firearms present. that we don't have computer searches for mass shootings or mass killings, that we don't have manifestos, that we don't have hit lists that might be in the possession of the student that we might be talking about. So all of these are global pieces of the law enforcement response in the event that we get a call, in the event that we have a concern of this nature. But once again, that law enforcement response is going to be very, very vibrant. And we have enough people, we have the expertise, we have the resources, and most importantly, we have the desire to take any such complaint very seriously and run it to ground. Once the investigation is complete, there are an array of enforcement options that are available. Since we're talking about school security, if we're talking about a student and a concern coming from the inside, you're probably talking about an individual under age 18. Connecticut state law would treat such an individual as a juvenile, and we would have an array of options from lowest to highest, if you will, that would include taking no action, if that was appropriate, allowing the school to take administrative action only, if that was appropriate. We do have a juvenile review board option here in the town. It is a strong juvenile review board. It has a lot of get up and go to it with some very committed individuals that are a part of it. The JRB is an option, or criminal arrest of a juvenile offender if we had a concern about that individual's behavior or a threat to public safety, and that criminal arrest could occur with or without detention of that individual. Those are smart choices and smart decisions that are made by Enfield police officers and their supervisory staff. Please know we don't take those decisions either way lightly. We would not make a decision to not charge a juvenile lightly. We certainly wouldn't make a decision to charge a juvenile offender heavily in a lighthearted fashion either. So in terms of investigation of in-school type threats, and this is a piece of the discussion of school security, I do want you to understand the takeaway, the pearl, the nugget, if you will, of the first part of my thoughts for you this evening would be the strength and the robust nature of any sort of law enforcement response in the event that there was a threat to community safety, school safety, or public safety. The second area that I mentioned to you a moment ago and that I wanted to address in my time with you was a brief discussion about the strength of Connecticut state law when it comes to firearms issues and pistol permit issues. Now, I feel like I need to set this up properly because I certainly do not want, in a discussion about school safety, to agitate or frustrate anyone that might happen to be a strong Second Amendment proponent. I suppose what I'm trying to say to you is that I recognize that within our community, within our state, and perhaps even within this very room, there are folks that feel very strongly about Second Amendment rights that are enjoyed by our citizenry. I engage in no political debate about whether or not any of the following are good ideas or bad ideas. I simply stand before you prepared to let you know what state law reflects now as to firearms ownership, as to firearms possession, to the extent that that's relevant to our concerns about an active aggressor or school security and school safety in a general sense. The federal law, the United States Code, creates, if you will, a floor of rules. States are permitted, and Connecticut is one of those states, states are permitted to be somewhat more restrictive in certain instances as to firearms possession, as to firearms ownership. And for better or worse, once again, one of my safe type phrases, for better or worse within our state, this community, this state, has opted to be somewhat restrictive as to firearms possession, firearms ownership. The federal law sets this floor under which an individual cannot go below if they intend to purchase a firearm, possess a firearm, carry a firearm. On top of those laws, Connecticut also provides for the risk warrant process, which I referred to earlier. There's been a lot of attention paid in that area on the heels of some of the more recent active aggressor situations. Risk warrants are a tool that are available in Connecticut to your law enforcement officers that are not universally available across the nation. A risk warrant would allow us, with a judge's approval, to go into an area of concern, probably a house, could be a business, and determine whether or not there were weapons there possessed by an individual that we thought presented a danger to themselves or to the community at large. The risk warrant option is a very worthwhile tool for law enforcement to have on its bat belt, if you will. On the heels of Sandy Hook, as you know, Connecticut also passed some rather restrictive firearms legislation. Once again, a controversial area. For better or worse, this is up to you as a citizen, as a voter, as a taxpayer. But Connecticut, on the heels of Sandy Hook, created legislation that limited the possession or ownership of certain classes of firearms and certain firearms by name. Connecticut also addressed high-capacity magazines, magazines in excess of 10 rounds, another Connecticut addition to the floor of rights, if you will, that the federal government provides for. We have in our state an option that we refer to as emergency committals. Emergency committals allow law enforcement to take an individual that we believe poses a threat to themselves or to others and voluntarily, if they would agree, or involuntarily, if necessary, transport that individual on a reasonable belief level of certainty to a medical care for evaluation by trained medical personnel. And that's another tool that we use judiciously but appropriately as a Connecticut law enforcement officer. Understand that to the extent that pistol permits become in any way a part of this discussion, Connecticut state law allows for the revocation of an individual's pistol permit in the event of any of a certain number of specified offenses, felonies and certainly felonies and certain disqualifying misdemeanors. Additionally, Connecticut allows for a pistol permit revocation under what is referred to as a suitability standard. Now, this is, once again, subject to some debate. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? It's somewhat difficult to define, but if a law enforcement officer is interacting with a person, and in the context of this discussion, we are concerned that that person might present a danger to public safety, if that person has a pistol permit, an Enfield police officer, a police officer anywhere in the state of Connecticut, is entitled to revoke that pistol permit or to refer that pistol permit holder to a unit within the state police called the Special Licensing and Firearms Unit for a determination as to whether or not that person is appropriate to continue to possess that pistol permit and to carry firearms. Connecticut enacted a 6-month ban on firearms possession for even voluntary mental health admissions. As you can imagine in just that brief description, this was controversial because we want individuals to seek care if they feel they need it in a mental health situation. And are we discouraging individuals from seeking care if we're going to ban them in the future from possessing firearms? Well, that's a debate for minds much smarter than mine. As a result of the Sandy Hook incident, on the heels of that and in the years that followed, Connecticut made that a part of our law as well. Pistol permit applications include a number of database checks to make sure an individual who is being given authority to carry a firearm is appropriately suitable. And remember that now even ammunition purchases require either an ammunition certificate or a state pistol permit. The discussion about state law is once again a piece of the broader school safety, school security discussion that I think brings us here together tonight. Finally, and I saved this one for the end because frankly I did think it the most important and I did think it the most directly germane to what it was we were here this evening to discuss. And that is the law enforcement response in the event of a doomsday scenario. I contemplated this subject area over the last several days, and I feel it important to set this sub-area up properly. You know when you watch a TV show and the TV show is intended for mature audiences? Before the TV show starts, there'll be a warning that'll come on the screen, and it will say just that. It will say, this television program is intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Ladies and gentlemen, this portion of the presentation is intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't mean to be flip in saying that. What I do mean to underscore for you is that the following observations may send a chill up your spine. They are not intended to scare you. Quite to the contrary, they are intended to reassure you. A portion, a large portion of what you should expect your police department to be prepared to do is to respond anywhere in this community, and certainly within the schools, in the event, I have to do the obligatory, God forbid, knock on wood, in the event that we have an active shooter within this community. So it's with that in mind, and once again, with an understanding that it's my desire to educate, not to induce fear. It's my goal to provide you with a comfort level, not to cause you sleepless nights, that I share the following with you. The Enfield Police Department has been engaged in what we in the law enforcement community call active aggressor training since at least 2007, and I suspect even earlier than that. The Enfield Police Department was engaged in this training before it was in vogue, if you will. In 2007, I was a state police captain assigned to serve as the commander of our Office of Selections and Training. Effectively, that was our training academy, our polygraph unit, our background unit, and our recruitment unit. And as a captain within the state police, I distinctly remember receiving a call from an individual who wanted to be proactive, and that individual was your former chief of police, who reached out to me and who said, Rick, we realize that in the event that there was ever an active aggressor within our community, that the response is not necessarily going to be straight up Enfield police officers. It's going to be an inspector from the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's going to be a trooper or two. It's going to be an officer who's passing through from Suffield or East Windsor or Windsor Locks. Shouldn't we all be doing this training together? This was an epiphany sort of moment. So what we did in 2007 was we brought the Enfield Police Department to the state police training facility where we were doing this training. For the better part of 10 years, the very dedicated police officers from within your town, and forgive me if that sounds like an advertisement, forgive me if that sounds like an infomercial, but I wouldn't have taken this job if I didn't feel that way about the police officers within this community. For more than 10 years, your police officers within this community have been drilling for this type of event. They have been prepping for this type of event. And there's some very specific training that we do in this regard. Please don't perceive prepping as a hidden message that we think this is going to happen tomorrow. This has been nothing other than training that has been done out of an abundance of caution. And I hope you are grateful that your community has engaged in it, because I'm grateful to show up in a community that has been that proactive about it. Your Enfield police officers are equipped, and they do wear ballistic body armor, bulletproof vests in the vernacular, if you will. The vast majority of Enfield police officers carry with them a patrol rifle when they are out on patrol. I don't want to turn this into a firearms discussion, and once again, I don't want to instill fear in anyone. We are talking about a doomsday scenario. If and when that doomsday scenario, God forbid, ever occurs, I want you to have a comfort level that the first responders are properly equipped, properly trained, and prepared to address that aggressor that might be anywhere within our community. I hope you will forgive me my quiet sense of pride on the next observation. But in preparation for this presentation, I sat down with the databases that are available to me, and I ran the period of time that I have been with the Enfield Police Department for what we call Priority 1 calls for service. Allow me to set the stage properly. When a call goes into the dispatch center at the police department, that call is triaged. Priority 1, Priority 2, Priority 3, in that order, top to bottom, most important to least important. The response time within the town of Enfield to put the first Enfield police officer on scene for any Priority 1 call for service, at least since the time of my arrival, and I have no reason to believe, I'd love to think they're doing extra good just because I'm here, but I'm not going to claim that that's the case. I have no reason to believe that this is an aberration. The period of time to put the first Enfield police officer at any Priority 1 call for service, and I would mentally ask you to engage in a drum roll right now. I'd ask you to ask yourself how long you think it takes someone to get to a scene. The answer is 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Now, I will own up that in the event of an active aggressor, 2 minutes and 36 seconds is 2 minutes and 36 seconds too long. But in terms of you knowing that help is coming and it is coming quickly, ladies and gentlemen, I come from a state police career, and I'm very proud of the work I did with the state police. I'm not going to engage in a detailed discussion about state police resources, but I will tell you that 2 minutes and 36 seconds is incredibly fast to put a law enforcement officer at the scene of any call for service, including a Priority 1 call for service. And that's the first officer on the scene, and the cavalry is coming thereafter. What is that first officer going to do? I don't know what happened in Parkland, and I would be very cautious to discuss that in a public setting if I did. But I want you to know that Enfield police officers know and would very appropriately engage and form up in what we call a hasty team. A hasty team might be the first 4 competent bodies that you can find. It might be 3. It might be you and a partner at 2, or it might be you alone, and you're going inside. Maybe you don't have a rifle. Maybe you didn't wear your bulletproof vest today. By the way, shame on you. But you have got the ability to neutralize that threat, and you are entering that school right now, and you are running toward the gunshots while everyone else is running away. In an ideal world, we would have enough officers on scene immediately to form what we would refer to as a hasty team, and that hasty team would go in. I'll sanitize it to some degree, but that hasty team would go in and they would seek to find and neutralize, because the threat that's being presented wishes to harm innocent civilians, whether that be school children or anyone else. The level of response beyond that first responder is frankly one of my last points, perhaps my very last point. On the day shift, which is when we would anticipate, at least within the schools, the highest likelihood of such an event occurring. The Enfield Police Department, give or take, has the ability to put 26 police officers at the scene of such an event. We run with 7 patrols, geographic patrols within this community. There's always a supervisor, a sergeant, a lieutenant, sometimes both. There are individuals assigned to our traffic squad, 3 school resource officers, the 4 administrators, including myself. If you were in the building or there was a camera trained on me and an event like this came in, you would see a blur coming out of my office because I'm deploying as well. Detectives, court evidence training and administrative services, 26 officers would be available on average, give or take, during the day shift to respond to such an event, to seek to neutralize the threat that was presented, and this number does not even include the state trooper that might be passing by, the Department of Motor Vehicles inspector passing through our community, neighboring police departments that are available, somebody who's off duty, who's in the building, who hears what it is that occurred. The men and women of your police department are your sons and daughters. They have parents in your community, and they have children in these schools. And if nothing else, I hope those closing thoughts stress for you how committed they are to doing right in this all-important area. I look forward, perhaps in just a few moments, to address any concerns that you might have, and I thank you for the opportunity to stand before you this evening.
Thank you, sir. We're all set, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, thank you for everyone for presenting Superintendent of Schools Chris Trezek, and of course our new chief, Rick Fox. This is the question and answer section. Can we ask that you keep it specific to the Enfield High, or Enfield security or anything to do with Enfield? If we can't get you the answer tonight, we will get to the answer as soon as we can. And we want to apologize in advance if the question is asked and the answer is, we have a plan, but we can't disclose it. Again, hopefully folks understand that we don't want to give our playbook out to public. I mean, that was part of the reason why we're doing this tonight, is to let folks know that we actually do have plans in place. Apologize if we can't give you all the details, but also to reassure folks that we actually do have a plan in place. So does anyone like to ask any questions? Sir, sure. Is it okay if may I give it to him, or doesn't matter? I'll go give it to him. Is that all right? You can sit in your chair. Look at that. I'll come give it to you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Rich Davis. I live on Pearl Street, just up the road, and my wife is a part-time employee here at the school. I'm here for that reason. I don't have any, my kids are well beyond high school age. But I'm here for another personal reason, in the sense of my own experience. First of all, I just want to say, because this is what's bothering me more than anything that I've seen tonight, is the absence of responsible adults here tonight. There's 12 people in this room. I was here about 6 months ago in connection with an opioid task team, and there was an excellent speaker, and there were 350 people in this room. And that in itself is obviously a legitimate issue, but I'm just amazed that this is 12 people, and I thank you guys for being here. My second perspective beyond my wife working here, which is my first priority, is that I'm a photographer, and I do a fair amount of sports photography. And I do specifically a fair amount of basketball photography in, let's just call it Northern Connecticut. And recently, in terms of night activity, sports games, gymnasiums, I have either carrying a satchel with my equipment in it, or a bag over my shoulder with a lighter array of equipment, professional equipment, walked in and out of schools freely, both at practices where I go in for a photo shoot, and the way I get in when I'm just trying to get into the school the easiest way I can is to simply walk in a door as a student's leaving. I walk in, and then I have a different experience. At Hartford High, I have one experience. At Plainville, I have another, etc. But it is a concern of mine how easily, with some baggage, if you will, and however you want to profile me, that's a very subjective thing, I can get into these gymnasiums. And most recently, I was at a game, and when I reached in to bring out my cameras, I actually thought to myself, could have been anything in this bag. I had 350 people sitting around me. There was nothing going on in terms of prevention, which leads me to my major concern. I do hear and respect and appreciate the reaction portion of what I've heard tonight, but I'm more concerned about learning, if appropriate, I don't know what you can disclose, what is going on in terms of prevention. Armed guards, detectors. With all due respect, the 2.5 minutes that was mentioned in terms of responses, I assume it's very, very good. But it raises the question in my mind, what is the average time taken to do damage in the schools that we've been talking about since January 1 and before and so on. So, and it's with that question in mind that my thrust is to learn more about what preventative, what deterrents are out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Chris, that might be a question for, yeah, and then maybe we can talk about.
And I'll try to answer at least the part of your question that I think I'm capable of answering, is particularly when it comes to prevention. All the things that I discussed and the chief so eloquently put as far as the preventative things that we're putting in place, and this is a conversation that we have a lot internally, and we also have a lot, actually, as much as we can, not just with our staff, but with our students. When it comes to a situation where, from the school's perspective, where a student may have an interest in inflicting harm on himself or others, the greatest prevention that we have, and it's unfortunate because I have high school age kids myself, and it's a lot to put pressure on those kids, but a lot of the first defense to that is going to actually be the kids themselves. And I don't say that lightly. What I say is if a child, if there's a warning sign, a lot of the warning signs are going to be shared amongst their own peer group, as opposed to if someone wants to do something, they're not going to call my office and say, I'm going to, tomorrow at noon, this is going to happen. What we've seen, and not just here in Enfield, but what we've seen and talked about with colleagues not only around the state and nationally, is when there are indicators that something might be off, the greatest prevention we have is the adage of if you see something, say something. I alluded to it a bit earlier in what I had, in part of my conversation was the number of times that we may hear something, and it's not that it was said directly to us. It might be something that a teacher observes that just seems a little bit off. It might be something that a child scribbles on the notebook. A lot of times, especially in this day and age, it's going to happen on these things. And for us, it's creating a culture for our kids to be comfortable to tell an adult, whether it's telling an adult in their classroom, whether it's telling a principal, it's telling somebody who works in the cafeteria, and just as importantly, as a parent, being comfortable to tell their parent, I saw something on Snapchat today, maybe I don't want my name associated with it, but will you call the school on my behalf? Those things happen. That's a priority for us to promote that type of culture within the schools, because unfortunately that's a lot of times where that information is going to first get in our hands so we can get it in the appropriate hands between law enforcement and school officials as well. I don't know if you want to add anything to the question. That I don't want to speak out of turn.
It is an outstanding question, and I think that the superintendent is best able to address the prevention piece, and he did. And the second piece, at least to some degree, falls to me to try to respond to. On the heels of Sandy Hook, there were different responses from different communities, and the town of Enfield, and let me describe this, let me set it up. I was watching it from the outside. The town of Enfield made a conscious decision that in a cost-benefit sort of way, that you wanted to have armed guards within your schools. By way of further explanation, in the event that there is any ambiguity, I would break it down into a couple of classes for you. You have within the high school and the junior high school 3 school resource officers. Now those are fully trained, fully state certified. They look like me in terms of clothing, police officers. The next level down, if you will, is the level that Enfield opted to pursue as a safety precaution after Sandy Hook occurred. That was a group of almost exclusively retired police officers, retired Department of Corrections employees that had gone through very vigorous psychological and background and suitability checks to become armed security guards within your schools. That was a decision that this community made. I don't believe anyone can say that the presence of those armed guards didn't make the school safer. There may be a whole host of pieces of this discussion about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea from an educational point of view, from an appearance point of view, from a use of tax dollars point of view. I don't engage in any of that debate. Would the presence of armed security officers make any location safer? I don't think anyone can disagree with that statement. Is that something that this community wishes to do? If that is something that the town wishes to do, that's certainly a program that the police department would spearhead and would supervise. But the answer to that first question, is this something this town wants to do, I think more appropriately is a communication between all of you and your elected officials, perhaps in a more private setting. I'm not sure on that.
Anyone else like to ask a question? Here, Bob, sit down. There you go.
Bob Tiketz, I know this is a very serious subject, and I'm not going to joke around. I know we went through this issue with armed guards in a public meeting, and I think the majority of the people at the meeting did not want armed guards in the schools. And I still hear that in the community. It's not that's my opinion, but majority of people that I talk to recall that. But my other issue, it's very easy to enter these schools. Very easy. I wish that would be secured better, especially the front doors. All you got to do is what they did at the emergency room at Middlesex Hospital. All you have to do is just drive in the front doors. So if somebody wanted to get inside the school, piece of cake in Enfield. JFK is an exception. My other issue is, as this gentleman said, which the question wasn't answered, it was a special event. He had his case. Nobody checked what he had. Somebody could come in at a football game outside. If they wanted to do harm, all they have to do is wait till the buses start leaving. So how are we going to secure that area to make sure nothing happens? And there's been no answers or talk about that subject. Thank you.
Do you want, I know what, all I can say is that each game we do have an officer. You know, I go to many of the basketball games in town, and there is an officer there assigned. You know, and certainly at the football games as well, and soccer games as well.
Well, the problem with the question is that there's no good answer. You are describing something that I think is just endemic to our world, and it's a concern at a school, it's a concern at the mall, it's a concern at the movie theaters, it's a concern at a restaurant, and you know, each one of us, again, as a voter, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, is entitled to have a belief as to how much we wish to trade away civil liberties to promote security. You know, we know that after an awful event occurs, that there's a tendency, and to some degree it's almost knee-jerk, to say, I will trade away civil liberties for that enhanced sense of security. And after time, that tends to wane a little bit. Are there areas, including sporting events, outdoor events, bus pickup and drop off, that are vulnerable? I think there are areas all over, unfortunately, that are extraordinarily vulnerable in nature. And I wish, I'm going to claim credit for candor in my answer, even if I can't claim credit for giving you some whiz-bang response that's going to make you say, oh, he's right. Nothing bad is going to happen at those locations. That's true in school settings, and I think it's true, unfortunately, in larger part in many, 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 many other settings. I suppose we have to ask ourselves to what degree we as a town, we as a state, we as a country, we as a society want to pay the money, pay the people, and install metal detectors and armed guards and barriers and concrete pillars at any place that might be vulnerable in nature. Once again, that's a much broader discussion than what I feel like I can address for you.
And just in context, too, I think it was 2014, I believe, right? There was a referendum that had hardening of all the buildings, I believe. I think it was 14 or 15, and I apologize for folks who've been around, that actually got voted down by the taxpayers. So there was something we already put out there a few years ago, they got voted down, and the current joint facilities committee that's both with Republicans and Democrats from the town council and from the Board of Education are currently relooking at some of those concerns that you mentioned. So that's actually within the works of that committee, ongoing. Unfortunately, not going to happen tomorrow, but again, something we're revisiting and again, relooking at as a joint board. Sure.
So as a mental health professional and a mom, I would like to know what efforts are being made to address the mental health and emotional well-being of the kids after lockdowns and drills. And certainly, if there's a lockdown at 8 a.m., I hope these kids aren't expected to just go back and, work as usual. I think we're expecting a lot out of our kids during these lockdowns. But I haven't heard a lot about any debriefings or how we're taking care of our kids after that.
So it's, as I said earlier, that anytime that we're doing from the drill perspective, there's always a debrief with all the parties that are involved to make sure that things went either accordingly or things that we can always constantly learn from. In the event that there's an actual lockdown or an actual event, fortunately, I'm going to use the same proverbial wood that the chief knocked on. When we haven't necessarily had many of those that would require us to have these conversations with kids, but one of the things that we have in place is we have sometimes referred to as crisis teams or support teams, and make services available for kids that may feel they need to. We also have the conversations with staff because no one's going to have a better idea about what their kids are feeling in their classrooms during an event like this than the teachers that are in there with them. So the amount of resources that we have in a particular school, if it's this school, it's a little bit different because of its size, but even in an elementary school, in the event something were to happen in an elementary school, we have district-wide crisis and support teams that we put on notice in the event that anything were to occur, not necessarily just a lockdown, but any type of traumatic event. To give you just an example, like I said, we're fortunate from not necessarily having an actual lockdown or an event as the chief was discussing, but there are times, unfortunately, when there are, maybe not catastrophic events to as far as volume, but there are traumatic events. If unfortunately a student passes or a family member of a student passes, that could have a great impact on the kids in that community for that day. Again, highlighting the conversation that communication between agencies. There are times where we'll get a phone call in the middle of the night if God forbid, there's an accident and there's a fatality and it's going to affect someone in the school community. Soon as we're notified, we put our crisis team in play. So maybe not necessarily in a particular elementary school that there's a dedicated team, but we also have district resources that will enact as soon as we're made aware of a situation to make sure that when the kids arrive that morning, there are counselors available. We also partner with youth services who provide crisis counselors for us as well. And we put that entire crisis team in place so that by the time kids either if it's something that happens outside of school the previous evening, by the time kids come into school that day, there's resources available for them, and anything that we have at our disposal, we give to them. In the event something were to happen during the school day, we also mobilize any sort of district resources that we have at that particular location to support the students and the teachers in some cases as well for the supports that they may need. Like I said, we've been fortunate when it comes to necessarily having an actual needed lockdown for an emergency issue where we haven't necessarily needed to put those things in place, but there are real life examples that have happened thankfully on a smaller scale, not to minimize the loss of anyone, but it's not uncommon for us to partner with not only with the resources that we have internally as a district, but also to reach out to our community partners to make sure that every available resource in the town and community is available for our kids. So.
So keeping it specific to lockdown drills, though, or lockdowns, whether they're legitimate or just drills, you have kids that are texting their parents whether or not they should have their phones, but are crying in a closet, petrified. So I'm asking what procedures or policies or what plans do you have in place to address those specific emotional concerns?
Well, I want me to answer then. Well, I think we're going to talk about sort of the chain of command, I think, or to what the communication between the chief and the superintendent of schools. I think that's a fair question if you have kids in the school, but I think part of it is, as we've talked about, as elected officials, as parents, we need to have discipline to make sure that we have some faith in the folks who hopefully you saw here tonight are doing their job. I mean, I understand in a crisis situation, we all get scared, we all get nervous, but as a community, we have to be disciplined. That again, that's part of this meeting is that we have meetings, we have procedures, we have plans that are constantly reviewed. You can see communication and coordination between the schools, the town, the police department, the fire departments, EMS, the administration. And I can say this with complete faith that no matter if you're a Republican or Democrat on the Board of Education or the council, every single one of us do this, and we care about safety, but we have to have discipline as a community where we have to have some faith in the folks to do their job. And I think the stuff that happened sometimes when it goes on social media, when some of the things that go on out there, that doesn't help the situation. And I think that's something as a community we need to do a better job of as an adults. I'm not talking about the kids, as adults, where again, we have to have some faith that our folks know what they're doing.
To echo what the mayor said with regards to social media, unfortunately, we live in a world where it's impossible for us to get out in front of the social media. The kids all have devices on them in real time. One of the things that we always try to stick to from a communication standpoint is putting out official statements, whether it be from myself or from the police department, when we know that we're able to share fact. The last thing in the world we want to do is create more panic with parents and with the communities, but we also understand the paradigm that kids might be texting their parents at the same time. There is no good answer to that because we can't get in front of that any quicker than we try to, but we also don't want to put information out, and I don't want to speak on behalf of law enforcement, but I know we've had this conversation for years. You know, we want to make sure that the information we're giving to the public is consistent and it's factual. But with regards to your concern about an actual lockdown drill and the dramatic effect they can have on a student, you're right, it could be dramatic for kids. Unfortunately, the incidents like this are designed to be dramatic on kids, and we hope we never have to do them. Last thing in the world we ever want to do is yell, hit the, I can't tell you how it's done, but to call a lockdown for it being real. But my answer is similar to what I said before. We've hopefully created a culture within all of our schools, in particular I know at this one, where there were kids that were having concerns or having anxiety over something that had happened because of the lockdown, or there's an anticipation of there being anxiety because of a lockdown. I have great faith in our staff, and I have great faith in our teachers in each and one of our classrooms that know that they know what these kids are feeling. They know that these kids need additional resources. They're a phone call away. They're directing a kid to a counselor. We have counseling and social workers in all of our buildings, that any resource that a kid needs as a result of this or any other reason, we make sure that whatever resource that student needs, they'll have them at our disposal. So I don't know how I can differentiate between the two of them. I really don't see the difference between any student that might be having, an emotional reaction to any incident, regardless if there's a lockdown or something happened in their personal lives. If we're aware of it, we're making sure we're putting as many adequate resources in front of that kid to help that child as we can.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh.
This is actually a question that one of my friends asked me to address, and I think it's been addressed in some of the conversations from the chief and from maybe some of the things that you said, Chris. But completing the hardening of the schools, I don't want to know the schedule. I don't know what timeline. I just want to know if it's going to be done. It was a $40,000 per vestibule cost back when I was on the board. It got shut down because of an accounting procedure from the former director of finance. So my question is this. Can we break these things up? We have 6 elementary schools that need some work. I don't know the degree of work that's there now. I haven't been in a school since I left the board. But can we break these up into more manageable pieces so we don't get caught into having to go out and get a single contractor bid? We can get multiple contractors in and break it up by whatever that threshold amount is. You can't answer it now, but I'd like you to consider it. The other thing is, when we're going through, driving around town, our schools are wide open. And I think the chief said it best. There's going to be a play between civil liberties and protecting our children. Like you go over to one school, the fields get used for soccer, wide open, and in other places across the country and across the world, these are all fenced in with a single point of entry. 2 points, actually, one for emergency vehicles and one for the daily school. So are we willing as a community to put those kind of fences around our schools as part of our process? That's a question I think that the board needs, that the people who are working on this plan need to consider. But Tim, I got to tell you, do you remember the days of duck and cover? We would have air raid drills. The siren would go off. We went to a specific place in the school building, and we took specific positions under things. I think kids are resilient. We were, and I'm not comparing our generation to them, but that's a reality. So that'll lead to another question for Mr. Drezek, and that is, do we explain the lockdown procedures ahead of the time to our children? If we do, great. If not, I think that might be a good idea to prepare them mentally for the event of a lockdown. Just a suggestion. Don't have to answer it, but I think those are things that we could do to improve the situation.
Thank you. Thank you. Donna, you want to, anyone from the facilities committee?
I don't know, Ray, if I have a perfect answer for you, but in the $41 million referendum, there was $5 to $6 million. I know from talking to Carol that they have at the state increased the level of financing you can have before you have to meet the thresholds for labor requirements. The only problem that you have is when you break things up into smaller pieces, somebody starts putting the pieces together, and before you know it, you have one project that's over the limit. So there's a lot of things that we have to be careful of. But it is on our radar, and we constantly are looking at how are we going to implement what facility needs we have.
Anyone else from the facility committee? Or? No? You guys all set? Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none. So again, we want to thank everyone for coming. And all the folks who are watching on TV, this will be on ETV. Again, I hope folks realize that, again, this is a 365-day job for everyone involved, and how closely the Board of Education and the Town Council work together. Also with our state partners who are actually doing some things as well with committees that they're putting together and grants that they're looking for to help the town of Enfield. And again, you can ask us any questions any day, any days of the year. It doesn't have to be a committee, but or a meeting. As we said, most of these folks are very accessible, and they're more than willing to talk about ideas. So I think we're going to make this an annual event. We'll hopefully do it next winter. We'll make it one of the quarterly meetings. And I think the next thing that you'll see, I think at least from the town council side, in August at our quarterly meeting, we hope to have an emergency management presentation, again, to kind of reinforce to folks all the training that are in coordination that goes on between the police department, the fire departments, the schools, the town, and it's ongoing even though you don't read about it in the paper. So that's what we're hoping to, again, reassure folks. I want to thank the members of the town council, members of the Board of Ed, superintendent of schools, town manager, our folks from all EMS, from the police department, from the schools, from the fire department, and of course all the folks who show up tonight, and of course our folks from the state as well. We appreciate you coming, and thank you very much. Have a good night. Motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor?
All right.